Ready, and they have requested that you say the name of the meeting when you open it.
Okay, thank you. Welcome. I would like to call the Human Resource Committee to order, noting that all members are here, including David Betcher is sitting in. Oh, no, not all members are here. Judy will be joining us a little bit late, but Brian Hafer is with us as well as myself. First, I need approval of the agenda.
Approve.
Thank you. Any public comments that came in today?
Not that I've seen, no.
Okay, thank you. So tonight we're really here to review the employee guidelines in each of our employee groups. So I'll turn it over to Brian.
Thanks, Joan. We have, again, 6 sets of employee guidelines. And so if we take a look at the overview of the draft employee guidelines, I think that's probably our most efficient way to go through. And this first section, it talks about changes that were made to all 6 sets of employee guidelines. Certainly within the board book materials, all of these changes, the universal and ones that are unique to each set of guidelines, are identified by color of text and strike through. And so old language shows strike through with new language written in the area around it to replace it. And so we can obviously go to any particular one set of the guidelines, but this highlights the changes that were made within them. In all 6 groups, just added a purpose statement. The purpose statement is simply to kind of remind folks what it's for, right? What a handbook is and what it's not, what it provides, what it does not, and so that, you know, as folks are looking through it, and it also includes a reminder that any printed copy of the handbook is a risk that it's not the most recent version, and that the most recent version is always available online. Second change that was universal is one that's very much related to administration, and also just trying to with a theme that we're trying to use in the HR office, which is syncing up our benefit cycles. FMLA is not really technically defined as a benefit. It's obviously both a federal and a state provision, but the federal FMLA provision allows for employers to select one of 4 ways to identify the 12-month cycle. And as we are going to be going over the course of the next school year, we're going to be syncing up all of our benefit cycles to a July 1 to June 30th year. It also made sense that we thought it made sense to match up the FMLA designation as a 12-month school calendar 12-month period of time. So that way, instead of what we currently have, which is frankly very confusing to employees, is what they communicate to us, and also it's the most challenging of the 4 to administer, because it always involves looking back from any particular day, 365 days, to see how many days of leave have occurred. If we just select a 12-month period of time, it makes it more easily understood by all. It doesn't change the allowance. You're allowed for 12 weeks. It just changes when we start the count for each particular school year and each particular employee if they take FMLA. The number 3 was workers' compensation. Very coincidentally, this year we had several workers' compensation claims, different employee groups, different buildings, and as you know, as employees ask questions about it, really discovered that the reason there were so many questions is that there was no information provided in any handbook related to that. And so what it put in there was information that we gathered from one of our insurance consultants, and also legal language drafted that coincides with legal language drafted by an employee, by a lawyer for another area school district, that explains workers' compensation protection, what it involves, how workers take time off, what it could cover, and what it can involve in terms of coming back to what they call transitional duty, light duty at times. Another area that was all handbooks were really silent on was one that in a number of different legal conferences and webinars that I've attended is a very basic recommended practice, in that you ask employees to notify you as a school district employer whenever they are arrested, charged, or convicted. And that is both at entry upon application and as they continue to be employed by you. In that it obviously prevents some potential situations where employees could have had something occur in the legal realm that could have effect on their ability to be employed. And so by having them notify Human Resources, we can look into that situation and see if any action is required. And again, the reason we have Human Resources identified is that as an employer, not all criminal charges, arrests, or convictions are significant or need to be announced to even necessarily a building supervisor, but it is something that we always should be looking into. Another piece of information is something that as a district we've offered for quite some time, but we didn't make mention of. So we just added the vision insurance provision to all the handbooks, so that for those that worked for the amount of time that qualified them, that they see that it's available. Number 6, the change is really just about it allow currently employees participate in the wellness assessment annually. That allows them a 3% discount, or the employer school district then covers 3%. The language that was currently in the handbooks was more restrictive to our practices as the employer about when we would accept documentation from a doctor in place of the assessment, which didn't coincide with what Dean, our insurance carrier, is using as a current practice. And then also it was more restrictive in terms of whether or not we continue to do an online portion of the assessment, which there are discussions both at a local and regional level about whether the online portion is something that will continue. And so taking out or making language that allowed for that to be a part or not be a part, depending what's communicated to employees, made sense. The number 7 was just to me it was related to a staff question, which I think made sense. Most of our employee groups had the opportunity to take bereavement leave for their father-in-law or mother-in-law, and again, when that question was posed to me, why not a son or daughter-in-law, I frankly didn't have a good reason why we wouldn't include that as well. And so bereavement is now going to include that for all employee groups. And then the number 8, it relates to a conversation or number of conversations that Randy and I have had throughout the school year, in that there was some inconsistencies. Certain employee groups asked Randy for time off and exceptions to time off policies. Certain groups asked the Human Resources Office. And so recognizing that Randy has got a lot of things on his plate already, I thought a universal place for that request would be the Human Resources Office, with the exception, didn't obviously change any of the language, such as for teachers, that if they're requesting a time off of a year or parts of a year, those still go through the school board. I only changed the point of contact from Human Resources across the board as opposed to the superintendent. Any questions on any of those general changes? All right, so if we kind of just work through the handbooks in the order that they were written in there, the first one really relates to, the first one is the Administrative Handbook. And so the only change that's not in the universal list, and I do want to point out, was that I did, within the contracted days of different positions, update those to reflect some of the discussions that we're having about administrative restructuring. So that would include changing of number of days for different assistant principal positions. There were a couple changes that have already occurred and weren't reflected in there. So I, again, but there are some in there, namely the assistant principal, middle school and elementary assistant principal positions do reflect administrative restructuring topics. I want to obviously point that out as something that is different in there than some of the other sections.
And Brian, these increase in days, that still has to go through budget, correct?
Correct. And so, thank you, Brian. Good point. Is that kind of process-wise, tonight, obviously giving you, the HR committee, the first viewing of the handbooks, before they would go to the school board for a first official reading, you could offer me edits that you want to see in there. I could edit them, present the edited version you've offered to me, or you've told me to create, to the school board, and then that would be what would be first reading. And so, for example, the administrative restructuring obviously is a tough topic for the budget committee, and depending how those discussions go, there is time for me to go back in, change those back to what they were, if that's not changes that are going to occur in this school year.
So, Brian, we can do that at the June 8th meeting if it comes out of budget that they are not recommending that? Can we them back to the 210?
I think yeah, we could put them back to we could put them back to whatever level you'd want to put them back to, and that could be, you could tell me to make that change that is discussed and agreed upon in the budget committee, and it can be open-ended in that regard too, Joan, because this is just a viewing. This is we still have, this is not action. Nothing here is action items tonight for changes.
First three that you have listed there, Brian, the student services, the intermediate and elementary principals, those are just cleanup because those were already at 261. The only two that you're reflecting are the associate at the middle school and the elementary associate days. And that's per the discussion that's coming up in budget and at the second draft of the budget when it goes to the board.
Yes, correct. The next handbook would be the Administrative Support Handbook. There were no additional changes to that beyond the universal changes. The third handbook then would be the Administrative Assistant Handbook. And again, universal changes, and then ones that were unique to this group would be that additional language was added to put their unpaid leave requests, make them more consistent with other hourly employees in terms of how far in advance they need to provide notice of those requests, and the amount of time that it's a daily opportunity. Number 2 was a change that went into a few different handbooks. There were questions, or just, I guess, clarity of communication. The practice has consistently been that sick days are vested, or you're granted them at the beginning of the year, but you haven't fully earned them until you've gotten to the end of the year. And so part of our new reality of employment is that folks are leaving more consistently now, and sometimes leaving before school years are completed. And so this was just some clarity in that until you've, for example, worked 5 months, you don't have 5 sick days. And so if you've taken more sick days than you are allowed by the time you resign, on your last check, for example, you would be reimbursing the value of those days that you were paid for earlier that you hadn't earned. Another sick leave is just this is consistency, so that step parents were incorporated as part of the immediate family. What I found as I was looking through this is that there was a lot of subtle and different languages related to sick days, vacation days, time off, and I think it's important whenever possible to be very uniform with those. And so if it existed in others, I made sure it existed in all. And so that step parent to immediate family is just another is one of those consistencies. Vacation is a clarity. This is just a clarity. What the language that was in there was confusing to folks, and so basically what that means is if I'm a part-time person, I'm granted the number of vacation days that my classification provides, but my vacation day is equivalent to the amount of time that I work in a day. So if I am a half-time employee, my day of vacation is that half day. And so it's just a clarification, so that folks could better understand that it's really not, we don't do hours, a bank of hours, we do it by the daily increments. And so this reflects that. And then administrative assistant in retirement, to make it consistent with the conversations going on within the teaching group, where we increased the value of a sick day at retirement by $5, I increased the value of a sick day payout by $5 for this, actually for all hourly employees, but administrative assistants as well. Thoughts or questions on those areas?
No, Brian, I appreciate you making them consistent with each of the groups. I think that that's important.
For full transparency, Joan, part of my reasoning is I would like to see us, instead of having 6 sets of handbooks, I'd like to see us realistically move to 3 sets of handbooks, because and so I want to try to, again, get them as closely aligned as possible this year. And there's still some differences, but if we can get as many things closely aligned now, it makes sense for employee fairness, and it also, I think, down the road, I think it makes sense for just ease of transition if we do indeed make that change someday. Classified staff handbook in the next one, and so I guess we got a few changes, and I see a typo, which I apologize. I'll apologize again when I get to it. Personal leave, this was an opportunity for them. There was one statement in the beginning that said that they could accrue sick days up to 120. That was not the current number, so they can accrue up to 188, and 120 of them are for retirement. So I just made sure that language was accurate to our current practice. And then in sick leave, the consistency of language is about asking for a physician statement. So now that now lives within all the different employee groups that had, so that's a consistent request. Also added in this one, it was both stepchild and step-parent, so that again makes it consistent with other groups. Number 3 is again a consistency matter. Other groups can carry forward 10 vacation days if they have them. This would allow these folks to do the same and be consistent there. And then this is the typo. My numbering somehow went off. It went from 3 to 5, but there's just 4 items there. So again, in the retirement, increase the value of the sick day by $5. Questions, thoughts, or concerns about those? Custodian and maintenance handbook. Within sick leave, this one didn't have stepchild, so again added that to make it consistent. The language about requiring physician's statement is now consistent across groups. In the custodial group, there was no language where it talked about using sick leave for care for your immediate family. This does now. I added that for consistency. It also aligns a lot more closely with family medical leave, which is what we're duty bound to provide if it applies, and this just kind of aligns that more closely with that. And then the language about using paid leave before unpaid leave for sickness is just consistent language from other employee groups as well. As you'll notice, the custodial handbook probably has next to the teachers some more changes than others, but a lot of the language was inconsistent with other employee groups, and in general, I guess I would say it was more restrictive in most cases, and a lot of that probably tied to the history of the negotiated agreements. And I know in an effort for us to treat employee groups as consistently as they can, I tried to make those changes reflective for all groups, and custodians benefited many times. In addition to having some things added that others had as well. Personal leave was one of those additions that prior to this edit that's been offered, and custodians, if they did not use their personal days, they disappeared. Other hourly employees, they changed. If you didn't use your sick day, your personal days, they changed into a sick day, and so this change was consistent for that. Bereavement leave. The bereavement leave language was, again, I think tied to some of those negotiations, but the bereavement leave now speaks to the exact same treatment of all employee groups, in that it is an option for them in immediate family, and they can extend to 3 additional days upon request, and they can also use sick days if it's not an immediate family. Unpaid leave, custodians, as you saw, they had a much greater timeline. They had to apply 4 weeks out, which was greater than any other employee group. So I changed the request down to 5 to make that consistent. Just added language there for our custodial maintenance group to use employee access, which is something they do already use and have been using, but this just highlights it in another area. The vacation language is the same as what we had talked about in the administrative assistant about part-time folks and how it's defined. Uniforms, they were given full 5 days worth of shirts and uniforms to use instead of 4. Just updated that. Updated the value of the sick day. And then also talked about the payment of $115 based on up to $115 based on their per diem salary. All of our custodians would be earn greater than $115 per day unless they are part-time, which we don't have any part-time custodians that are anywhere near retirement. But a payment of $115 would equate to $2 less than the starting wage of any custodian. So this is a number really that the cap is the 115 as opposed to their per diem. And then as custodians and teachers have access to the alternative benefits plan, or the cash in lieu instead of taking insurance, that language, the edit to that language syncs up that we're going to be doing to get the benefit years all to be July 1 to June 30th. That means that we will have to do a short year. We'll have a January 1 to June 30th year, and then everyone will re-enroll. And at that point, all benefits will be on that same July 1 to June 30 calendar. This language says that they've got to make those alternative benefit election choices both prior to January 1 and then prior to June 30th for the new year. And then after that, it'll be on the same cycle.
Just for background, Brian, why do we have groups that are at different stages?
It's right now in our insurances. Our health insurance has a July 1 to June 30th year. Our vision and our dental and our Best Flex insurances have a January 1 to December 31 year. Just trying to sync all those up. That's for all employee groups, but just trying to sync them up so that an employee signs up at one time during the year for all those things and doesn't have to worry about it twice. And frankly, not only do the employees not have to worry about it twice, my office doesn't have to worry about doing open enrollment seasons.
No, I totally get it. I thought it was meaning that you had separate employment groups at different health levels, not the vision, health, and dental.
Sure. What I was referring to about what is different is that right now only 2, Brian, of our 4 employee groups have an opportunity to take cash instead of insurance if they're eligible, and both those employee groups, the teaching employee group and the custodial maintenance employee group, both of those really tie to historical collective bargaining agreements, and so they're the only 2 employee groups that can take the alternative benefits plan. And so that's what I apologize for the confusion in my language.
Nope, just trying to get some background.
Any other questions, concerns about that section? The next set of guidelines is the teacher guidelines, and actually this first section 1A1 is actually something that their further developments really occurred today, and further conversations have occurred over the past week. And I'll certainly have asked Joan maybe to speak to it a little bit as well. But that language that delineated the number of daily minutes was at least an initial request for some real clarity about what the district practices were. in terms of how part-time contracts could be calculated and how different buildings, what a full-time teacher looks like. After seeing it in the manner that it was written up, there was some real questions from the WTA leadership, whether that language edit will be helpful or whether that will create some more angst and in hard times, I guess. And so their request is that we would actually leave that language consistent to what it was, the old language, and then have that be a subject that we revisit more in depth next year. And I would concur, and that was obviously the goal, was for clarity and for, I mean, really that was it. I'd say the goal was for clarity for employees, but I don't want to create issues for folks if they, you know, and so they just want some more time to review it, and I concur that that's a good idea.
Actually, Brian, I think you've covered everything. Just for a little background for individuals, when we moved away from collective bargaining after 2010, the district formed we call it an HR work group that consists of the WTA leadership, but we always make sure that we have an individual that's not a member of the union. We try to have individuals that are representative of each of our buildings across the district. And this group meets regularly to improve the language and be sure our language is consistent with practice. And I've been kind of a part of that group since the beginning in 2011. And this particular item generated a lot of conversation, not only this year, but over the years, particularly in reference to specialists in the K-6 level and part-time in reference to what a full-time load should be or is. We know that there's some inconsistency when you look at a total of 315 minutes. So we tried to bring clarity, but after it got written down in probably the correct practice, I mean, I do think the numbers you saw represented what is happening. It suddenly looked too pigeoned, and I think it caused more concern with the committee that could be misinterpreted, especially when you see an increase in 5-6 and a decrease in kindergarten, and they didn't like how it appeared after much discussion and it came out in print. So after some discussion, I had a little discussion with Brian today, asked him to reach out to our 5th, 6th representative as well as our leadership. It really came back that we should table it for another year and continue to study it. So I certainly endorse, because the whole purpose of the committee and reworking the handbooks is to bring clarity and to bring more peace of mind with working conditions, and not to create more of an angst, as Brian worded. So anyway, that's kind of some background to where we are with the language updates.
So the only thing I would say is it doesn't require, this is like this evening is not really an action item, but if I could just have make sure that if I indeed pull that edit off the table, that you folks are going to be comfortable with me doing so, knowing that it likely will be revisited and something different will be permitted last year, or something different will become next year, but I'll just pull back from what I had put out this year.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, I'm in favor of that.
All right. The next one, Section 1, Part B, we currently do not have any job shares in the district. That language referred to a historical timeline of if it occurred. We did have some job shares within that time frame, and so there was just that reference of if you were existed here, you're grandfathered in. If you're after it, you're under these. Since we don't have any, I just struck that language. And if we were to ever go back to having them again, the language exists about how they'd be identified, and they would be moving forward, not moving backward. Section 3, Part A, there was that reference, and I honestly I don't know historically when that came there, but it spoke to evaluation, a rework of evaluation being tied to layoffs. We have worked on our evaluation over a number of years, a lot of them corresponding the most recently to the changes within the state that started in 2014, I think. Does that sound right? I think it's 20, but at no point have we ever tied it into or made any language that, in fact, the state specifically talks about that language, evaluation and the Charlotte Danielson model, which we use, as it should not be part of layoffs or comparisons from teacher to teacher. So since that is not the goal and not the essence of what we're trying to do in that evaluation area, I struck that language. Part 3B and Section 3B, I believe that's the grievance language. Is that, I don't have it open in front of me, but I believe that the addition that I added there was strictly, it corresponded to statute. And if you look at it, it does two things. All it does is clearly outline April 30th, which was already outlined by the timelines in the language. And now it just put in April 30th, so I added April 30th. And it also talked about the opportunity for a representative. That's in statute, so it's language we have to follow. And so since the statute speaks to that, that's what our language speaks to as well. Let's see. The Section 3C, there was a little bit of discussion earlier, earlier in HR committees about what that should look like. What I left it as was flexibility to potentially give credit for a rehire's prior service within the district, as opposed to a direction of yes we will or no we won't. Knowing that there are certain things that we can which would make it consistent to other discretionary placement decisions. I think that would allow for consistency there, and some flexibility as well. Section 4A2 really is it's the same language that was in Section 1A1, and so that would be just struck at this time and stay the same and be revisited in the future. Section 4A5, sorry, I do have it here. I have not kept up in terms of turning the pages, so if somebody has that open, if you could tell me what it is, I'll tell you why it's there.
It's about the high school full-time load.
Oh,
Instead of writing it as 6 out of 5 or 5 out of 6, we're just combining it to a total, I believe.
Yep.
I think you're doing 11 out of 12.
Yeah, that's exactly. And so when we talk about high school schedules are built based on the 12 sections in a year, and so it was really confusing language because it talked about teachers accepting and the practice and the language permits up to the 11th section that can be assigned to teachers. The 12th section, if it becomes a teaching load, needs to be compensated. And so that's what that language now clarifies for everyone is the first 11, they can be classes. The 12th has to be paid. I'm almost to the right spot again. All right. Start again. Section 4A6. That one refers to the fact that the folks in that listed in kind of that section have a very high degree of daily schedule control. In fact, they often build their schedule. Something that came up a couple times is folks ask questions of, hey, I don't have a lunch schedule, and as I reviewed the situation with the principal or with the director, they shared that it's because that's how that person created their own schedule, and so that direction. So they schedule themselves through a lunch, and so the point of putting that in there is that reminding them we do want, for example, everyone to have a lunch. We do want everyone to have the appropriate amount of prep time that they need. But when you control some of your own daily schedule, you've got to make sure you're putting that in there while you're taking care of your other professional responsibilities.
Brian, can I stop you a minute?
Yeah, absolutely.
Going back to the high school full-time teaching load,
yep.
I know what we talked about, and I know what you sent the committee, and you wanted to change it to 11 out of 12, but I don't think it's in the document. I opened up the document, and I think it's still written as 6 of 5 or 5 of 6. So I don't think the edit got into the document.
Okay, let me just open up Board Book, Joan, and I'll definitely check that out. I'm sorry. I've got 2 screens, and right now I'd like to have 3 screens. Randy, can we get 3 screens set up? All right, so extras.
So it's on page, well, I have 21 in the teacher handbook.
Okay. I think that, Joan, that 6-5 or 5-6, that I think that is that's what the Todd in particular had suggested. Do you think that was different?
I thought we talked about that, and we were going to just write it as 11 out of 12.
Let me see if I
thought you sent us some wording after our meeting, because then I didn't see it here. And we don't have to take time now, but there seems to be in my brain some inconsistency between what we decided at committee and what's showing up.
I'll definitely run that back.
Yeah, double check that.
All right, I got it. I will, absolutely. Page 20.
Because I remember it being this way, and we talked about how can we do 6 out of 5, and then we just thought it should be a total of the 2 semesters. I will look into that and see what happened there. I apologize if I didn't capture that, or I could. It's likely I didn't get the right set of notes to Amy, who does the formatting for me. And so that's probably an error on my part. It's a lot.
All right. Where's my, there we go. Let's see. We were on, I think section 4A12. That is example language to lay out for folks how travel time is calculated, and that's a question that I gotten a few times. Typically, that question kind of pops up in the spring when we start to talk about shared staffing. Teachers that are shared between buildings have asked, a few of them asked me how that worked, and so I thought putting it out there would be helpful to them to see what that calculation looks like. Let's see, section 4B5, that referred to language where it kind of talked a little bit about time for parent-teacher conference prep, early releases, prep for department meetings. It's just not something that we just don't do that anymore, and so it's not current practice. Pulled that out of there. Section 5A1, A1A. So that again was just that's just clarity, and so that folks are not confused about the 12 days includes the 2 days of 2 personal days that are granted. It's not 12 sick days and then 2 personal. So that was just a question that came up this year, but an easy change. So I thought I'd make sure we made that accurate. The next one is really, I think, just kind of one of those, what I would say, it makes sense in that I don't know exactly how or why it started as saying if someone's at step 4 or greater and they have sick days that they left in another district, that we'll let them have up to 5 per semester coming here. They can, in essence, bring some with. It's a way to make it more appealing for an experienced teacher to come to our district. Again, the logical thing is that if any teacher is coming with experience from another district and they have time available to them that they've left behind, it makes sense to offer that to all. So that's why I struck out level 4 or higher. That just permits any experienced teacher that chance. Let's see, next one. A4C. That again just speaks, to making sure that folks know kind of how the allotment of days work, and so you have more days than you've earned, I guess, before you get to there. 5A5 talks again, that's numbers that haven't been increased, even though our staff size has steadily increased for quite a number of years. It's a very it's a very small increase, to be frank, but it's one that makes things a little bit more reflective of the fact that as a larger teaching staff, we're making things generally more restrictive every year that we don't look at some of that, and so that just starts to loosen that up a little bit in a very measured and controlled way to make sure we're still kind of monitoring sub availability.
When you have personal days, is it across the district, or each building has only so many that they can use?
Each teacher has personal days, and then they submit those for approval, and buildings can fill up if you would, or is it just the buildings? I think it's just
it's teachers per district as well as
10 per district and then 4 per building. So we're
increasing it to 12.
Yep.
12 per district? 12 per district only?
Yeah. Yep. it's still a very modest number, undoubtedly. But what I would say is that personal days in general across employee groups do have caps. Some of they look a little differently depending on whether it's more district-wide, a district-wide employee group or a building-specific employee group. But they all tend to have a cap for just continuity of operations, and in the teacher's realm, really substitute coverage. It's you get beyond, in our case, 35 to 40 subs in any given day, and we're likely going to have unfilled positions. And if we're talking about hourly employees, subs are really non-existent. Let's see. The language changes in section A or 5, A8, C, and D just relate to making the language a little bit more readable in terms of what expenses are referring to, and in terms of who is assigning those, or again, when the district asks the employee to do that, it is the district's then role to pay for those things, and who chooses who that other doctor could be. It's really a district choice as opposed to the board having to make that choice, as it's administrative as opposed to governance. Let's see. Section 5B, 2 and 3. Those are again just clarity of language. Some confusion as folks read that. What do I come back to? Do I come back to what I left at, or do I come back to what I would have advanced to had I stayed? That allowed folks to understand that if you were on track to advance, when you come back, you will advance. And then again, the other parts is if you'd never left, just the clarity of what they're allowed. And then let's see, section 6. I guess as I'm flipping pages, questions, concerns on that section. I guess I kind of plowed through a number of sections, but without talking or stopping.
No, like Joan said, as long as the policies match the practice in the district,
Yeah.
that's what we're trying to probably get through.
Yep. All right. So benefits. The first one, 6A2. This was as I read the handbook in depth in this section, I did not realize that my chairpersonship was an elected position. It was presented to me as more of a designated position, and so I did strike that, not for a power grab, but also but for the realistic, just the consistency of information and consistent facilitator. It makes more sense, I think, to have that role not be revolving and just consistent. The next two areas reflect the work of that teacher HR work group that Joan had mentioned before, and also align a little bit to what some of the things I'd mentioned before. What that group did was look through the handbook in total. We stripped out every financial component, prioritized them, and then built a review schedule related to them. And these two items were the ones that they identified and we set action on for this year. And that would correspond to the increasing value of a sick day by $5, and the HRA contribution to go up $20. And we have two different employee tenures for this. We have the if you were hired prior to 2008, you fall into the section 6G. You're in that section. If you were hired after 2008, you fall into section 6H. And so this is consistent between those two, and what the group was looking at or asking for. Section 6L7, again, this is like the custodial maintenance group. They have an opportunity for the alternative benefit plan, the cash in lieu of insurance. This just allows that to sync up the plan year with the election. Questions, thoughts about that section?
So Brian, just to clarify, we have some budgetary items in there, the payout to retirees of unused sick days, as well as the HRA contribution. And that all needs to go through budget yet. So again, we have language in here that is, we are kind of waiting for budget to weigh in on it. So, you know, I think we should leave it as is, assuming that budget will find, I mean, they're not huge budgetary items, but I think everybody needs to realize that they do need to go through budget yet.
Yes, correct. Absolutely correct. This would definitely fall into that same that same process that you just described.
Okay.
Next section we go into is really the compensation section. Section 8. The first one is just a language correction. There's national boards for many teaching licenses, and for those areas that there isn't a national board certification, Wisconsin has developed its own, which is called the Wisconsin Master Educator certification. At one point, it was called the old, master level PI 34. That isn't what's in effect now. So that's just a language change to make it reflect what's going on, what's available to folks at this time. Section 8B is there was some confusion without that in the student services world, because ESY is, which I think when it was originally written, the term extended school year was used interchangeably with an extended contracted day, and they are not the same thing. Extended school year, ESY, is a special education service that continues into the summer, and it's as part of a student's IEP. An extended contracted day is additional days given to certain employees or employee groups for them to do their work. And so just split those up so that that everyone knows what again, the folks that are doing it know what the difference is, but there was some confusion about which area they were working under. And so by splitting it out like that, it makes it clearer about what area of work you're doing and how you're being paid to do that work. Section 8G is just something that came up this year that had never happened before, which is another unique opportunity for a new HR director. Is we had a couple different instances in different buildings where teachers would use their prep time to fill in for para-educators, prep time or lunch, and so we didn't have that identified how we would pay that person, and so what we did is we just used the same hourly rate as a teacher covering for a teacher. We moved that as a teacher covers for a para-educator, they get get covered, they get called into that. And then the other part is an emergency response team. In some of the buildings in our district, we have very well established emergency response teams that help with students in crisis, safety related measures. And those folks are called into duty specifically first by those who are on prep. And so those folks were giving up their prep for important student related work. And so this, again, we equated it to a subbing role, subbing time. And again, if and when they're called into duty, that can be time carded at the rate that's identified. Then the last part of that section that was adjusted was the residency recommendation. It's certainly a historical part of many teaching handbooks or old teaching contracts, but it tends not to reflect kind of the current reality of folks being commuting more, and in some cases just the financial ability of folks to live or where they can live or what they can afford. Any questions, concerns, thoughts about that section?
Brian, I have to, we're back. I have to go back a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
Sure.
I should have stopped you earlier. I'm on page 42 of the document under HRA of the employees hired after 08.
Okay.
I believe we need to update that. We're updating all the HRAs by $20, but the vested amount, that 300 is going up to 310. I thought we wanted to do that consistently.
We did. You know what? You're absolutely right, Joan. So that ties directly to that same conversation we had before. I must have given Amy the incorrect version. So
yeah, that whole section, yep. The numbers are not correct.
Yep, I will absolutely. I will. I know exactly what I did. I gave her my old set of notes, original edits, and so the new edits will have both that and the high school load.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, I apologize, but thank you for catching that. Any other?
I haven't seen. Those were the two things that I'm paging through again.
Yep,
it's a lot.
Those are definitely the two things that the committee really adjusted.
Yeah, our final meeting, I know that we had some conversation on those two items.
All right.
Brian?
Yes, sir.
Sir, oh my God. Just going in on removing the residency recommendation, I got to say, as an optics thing, I'm not sure. It's not enforceable anyway. Why are we removing it? I mean, there's a lot of talk in the community about residency, and I just think for us to just pull it out at this point just sounds poor.
Part of it, I think it came from the group asked for it to come out. And then when I brought it up with, I think it was in April. I think we had an April HR committee meeting, or was it in March? I brought it up with that group, and I said this is a request that the teacher HR work group had thrown out there. They thought that it, again, historical but not necessarily current practice. They said to take it out, and so yeah, it very much is, I think, an optics part. And the language, the way it's written, it's a recommendation, not an order. So
right. But as we push that, one of our biggest problems is teachers not being able to live in Waunakee, and then we say, well, don't bother to live here. I don't know. I'm going to have to think about it. I know a lot.
If you look at it the other way, if we're recommending that they live here and we don't have the appropriate housing for them, that doesn't make sense either.
Oh, no, I totally agree. It just makes it seem like we're giving up. But on your other one, I'm sorry, going back to the previous area number 5, the very first one, you removed the thing about the committee voting for its own chairperson, which I totally agree with. But then we left nothing to say who does chair the meeting.
Oh, that's
so I'm thinking we should maybe state that.
Yep, I will. I'll add that in.
And
do you want to add that as? Should I add that as executive director of operations?
I'll leave that one to Randy to call that. But
that was just a sound check to see if Steve was still out there.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
So, I mean, our 2 normal appointments for admin are you and Steve, right?
Yes. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
I'm wondering if we say who the chair is, we need to change the 2 admin. Are we going to state what positions they are?
Oh.
Or if we leave it open, we have to somehow state who that chairperson is.
Okay.
Or do we just state the 2 positions and don't say 2 admin anymore? I guess, again, I leave that up to Randy because personally I don't really have a care. But somehow we have to state who the chairperson is and how that gets selected.
I can absolutely, I can definitely confirm it with, I think it was part of the conversation that Steve and I had coming into the year was that insurance and benefits typically lived in most districts in the Human Resources Office. And so it was a kind of a transitionary year where Steve worked a lot with me to kind of transition that from what was the business manager's role to the director of human resources. And so, but I think it absolutely makes sense for us to identify if it's going to live here, which I think it makes sense to. And I only threw that out to check and see if Steve was still with us. Because I've been pummeling him with long meetings. Is just to identify it as human resources, and then probably identify it as the business manager or executive director of operations, so that it's got that flexibility built in of who that second administrative role is. Are we okay to move into section 10?
Yes.
And so section 10 is again, the first edit is just allow the superintendent to, if we have a reason or need to extend the timelines, allows the superintendent to do that. This year, his flexibility to extend it went beyond the length of time that we felt we needed to, and so it required a board action. And this would allow superintendent to take that extension action without having to have the board take a larger action on it. The next one is just to, again, reflect current DPI language like we talked about in the prior section. And then the co-curricular schedule is highlighted because, again, the language is we're continuing to move that up $2,000 until we get it to the point where the base is equal to the co-curriculars base. I think we're definitely close enough at this time where, depending on how negotiations go, that overlap could be this year. And so made note that it would be adjusted, but whether it would be the 2,000 or the negotiation amount, left that open to be determined. And then just addition to the club schedule that's in there, and then finally the last change of adding the weight room supervision. That was one of maybe the first thing that Tammy Weishoff pointed out to me that needed to be fixed in the handbook, is that aligned to what our current practice is. It's not identified anywhere what that rate was, and she said it needs to go there, and that's what the rate is, and so that's what I put in there. And that brings us to the end of our 6th handbook.
Okay, so at this point, we're not approving them at this level. Are we just passing them on to, or are we making a motion to approve them at this level? Brian, what do you need?
I would say that Joan, what I'll have is I've got those edits to put in that I know that need to happen. And then also there's the edits that are contingent upon the discussions of the budget committee.
Yes.
I will make the necessary changes based on how those things turn out. And then the new revised versions will be in the board book for the regular meeting, which would then require a member of the committee to make a motion for action for first reading and approval of first reading at the June meeting.
Okay. So we just, if there's any other discussion, that's all you want right now.
Yes, please.
So committee, we have about 6 minutes left. Anybody have anything that you want to say? Well, we have 6 minutes left because some of us have to go to a budget committee. I guess some of you can just sit here and talk about it all night.
Right.
Any other discussion or concerns that you have? Brian, I have brought that one item up to you earlier today. Determination of part-time contracts done by the Board of Education, which never, to me, has never happened. That was on line 32 of the part-time page.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to look at that. That to me didn't align with, it wasn't something that came out of the group, but it doesn't align with anything I think is happening.
Yep, and I absolutely do. I absolutely can make that edit as well, Joan.
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're the one that makes the decision on what percentage of part-time is going on.
Mm-hmm.
Any other concerns from anybody? Brian, do you have what you need?
I do, thank you.
Okay, so I think we can entertain a motion to adjourn.
I so move that we adjourn.
Yeah, I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Thank you, Brian, for all your work. This is a monumental task to always update these handbooks, and I appreciate so much.